Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine and today we're going to be talking about blue, the colour blue in ceramics. So how is blue made in ceramics? All colours in pottery are essentially made from metal oxides, and that's because metal oxides are one of the only substances that won't kind of like burn out at the very high temperatures that pottery is fired to. So if you think about, other colorants, they'll simply just burn away. Say colorants like dyes and stuff like that. They'll just burn out because, pottery is getting to, up to kind of like 1,300 degrees in some cases. So metal oxides are the way in which potters color their pottery. So the colour blue is actually made by the metal cobalt. So what happens is it's made, cobalt metal, cobalt ore, is turned into a substance called cobalt carbonate and another substance called cobalt oxide. So it's those two things that potters use to make the blue colour. And what they do is they either mix it with like a bit of water and just like paint it onto pottery, or they mix it into glazes at a kind of ratio. Cobalt's quite a strong pigment, so it's usually done at a ratio of sort of like 1-2% in a glaze. So cobalt oxide is a stronger pigment. It's like a dark kind of black powder. It's a stronger pigment than cobalt carbonate, which is a kind of light purple pigment when you see it as a powder. And so both these substances made from cobalt colour pottery blue. And if you think about kind of like, like a Denby tea set or something, that traditional kind of beautiful like cornflower blue, that is actually made with cobalt. So what's the problem with cobalt? Loads of potters use it. It's a very standard, thing to use in pottery. In fact, 8% of the world's cobalt that's mined from the earth actually goes into creating pigments, for blue, basically, to make the colour blue. So what's the problem with cobalt? Well, the supply chains of cobalt are quite tricky, the global supply chains. So Amnesty International has written a lot about this, the human rights organisation, and they've done a report in 2016 which you can read kind of all about the cobalt industry, and 80% of the world's cobalt is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there are two kind of sources of cobalt mining feeding into the supply chain in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the first is like commercially mined cobalt, and then the second is what's called artisanally mined cobalt. And artisanally mined cobalt is essentially people sort of like self-employed mining cobalt by hand. And Amnesty International have done loads of research basically on the artisanal mining sector, and what they found was that like most people in that sector are working without any health and safety equipment. There's human rights abuses, loads of health problems amongst miners, and they also found thousands of children working in that sector. So The issue with cobalt in particular is that because both of these supplies of cobalt, artisanally mined cobalt and also commercially mined cobalt, they're both feeding into the supply chain. And what happens is they're mixed at what's called buying houses in the Democratic Republic of Congo before being shipped abroad to get processed basically into kind of cobalt products, including batteries for renewable energy sources and also pigments. So this is the essential issue with cobalt, is that you will never really be able to tell whether the cobalt you're using is from an artisanally mined source or commercially mined source. So say, for example, you wanted to, exclude cobalt from your pottery practice because of that reason. So are there any other ways of making blue in ceramics? And the essential answer to that is there isn't at the moment any other way of making that very bright blue colour in ceramics. And this is why, lots of potters will face this difficulty. They're using blue, they're using a commercial glaze, which is beautiful blue, and that's, had cobalt added to it. So they're using it, maybe a stain as well. Again, that might have cobalt in. So, either they're mixing up their own glaze with cobalt oxide or cobalt carbonate, or they're using a commercial glaze potentially with cobalt added to it or a stain. So at the moment, there is no other way of making that bright blue colour without cobalt. However, there are some other ways of adding colour to pottery in more kind of like eco-conscious ways, basically. So one way is to use plant ashes in your glaze, right, as a potter. So many plants actually take up minerals and trace metals from the soil as they grow. So I did a whole other episode on this actually, and so many plants do produce like a colour when you make them into a glaze. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I actually have a plant ash glazing course on the Oxford Clay website. And also there's loads of resources there, like plant ash glazing resources. There's a book as well on like plant ash glazing and 60 different glaze tests of plants. So you can see like the different colours that each plant makes and stuff. And whilst none of them make a kind of blue, bright blue colour, lots of plants do make a kind of very gentle light blue colour. So if you still wanted the colour blue, if you're a potter, you want blue, plant ash glazing, could be like a way forward. It's not going to be as bright, but it's going to be, it's still going to add like some colour. Okay, so another way of adding colour to pottery in a kind of more eco-conscious way is to actually make, potters can actually make their own metal oxides from recycled metal. So, there's two metals I found that are easily available in the UK to do this, and that is copper and also iron. So again, there'll be there's a whole episode on that as well, about potters making their own metal oxides, but really just to say it is possible to get like a green colour and also a kind of brown colour from making metal oxides from recycled metal. So so if you're a potter and you're interested in finding out more about how to make your own metal oxides, I've got a video course on that, and it goes through how to make your own iron oxide and how to make your own copper oxide from recycled metal. So those are the two options, and so cobalt is it's an essential problem in pottery. As potters, I've actually not really heard that many potters talking about cobalt, and it could be that people just don't really know the supply chains, because it's not really talked about that much, but like I said, Amnesty International have some great resources, amazing research. If you're interested in learning more about the cobalt industry, global supply chains of cobalt. Yeah, I'd really recommend that. All the reports are like free on the website, and you can just read them, download them. And if you're interested in learning kind of like, more generally about glazing materials, including cobalt, and all other metal oxides, at Oxford Clay, I've written a book on sort of eco-conscious glazing. So it goes through all the different materials and like where they come from, and how eco-conscious they are, how to tell if your materials that you're using are eco-conscious, especially in glazing. So the title of that book is Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing: Make Your Own Pottery Glazes with Minimal Harm to Humans, Animals and the Environment. And again, that's available on the Oxford Clay website. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode on making blue in ceramics and alternatives available, and really looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye.